It's not all about elite racing, it's about mass participation as well. Boys, girls, people of all ages, all abilities getting on the bike and getting out there and enjoying themselves. And we're really big on this at the Wheelhouse, as you are with your projects that you work on with chicks who ride bikes and all of that. And it actually brings us to some research that we stumbled across. It comes out of Monash University in Victoria. It's a report focusing on ways to boost participation for women and pushing measures that can be taken with future urban planning to remove barriers that impact the desire and the confidence of newcomers to the sport. I find it really fascinating, and I'm very happy to say that Dr Lauren Pearson is a co-author of the report. She's from a group called the Sustainable Mobility and Safety Research Group. That's from Monash University. And Lauren's on the line right now. A very warm hello to you, Dr Pearson.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute privilege to have you on the Wheelhouse podcast.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr Pearson. Some really interesting research has really hit the media this week around the barriers, especially for women entering the sport. Can you tell us a bit about how this project came to be? Because obviously as very supportive bike riders, we're keen to understand any of the challenges to get more people on bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess from a personal perspective, I grew up riding my bike around the town I lived in, which was a very, very small town in rural Western Australia called Wickham. And when I first moved to Melbourne, I found that suddenly I had to ride on the road alongside all these cars, and it was just absolutely terrifying. And I thought that maybe there's cases not only for me, it's for other people as well. So I embarked on a PhD really looking at the barriers and enablers of people for riding bikes, particularly for transport specifically. We didn't actually intend to look at the kind of gender differences. I was really starting out just looking at overall barriers and enablers across Australia and within Victoria. But we found that these gender differences were just so stark and so significant that they just had to be reported on, and it ended up being a major part of my PhD and really now the focus of my career going forward.
So we're saying more people can get involved if we remove the barriers, basically. I'm interested, Lauren. Kate's has a very elite background in the sport, has done some incredible things. I'm very much a newcomer. I'm proud of myself for staying on the bike when I go down a slight slope. But I want to know, are there more women expressing concerns, I guess, about safety and confidence than there are men? And where are those concerns sort of coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. So the study really revealed that safety is that number one barrier for people overall, but particularly women for riding a bike. So real concerns about having to ride alongside motor vehicle traffic and the kind of associated safety concerns that we see with that. So things like concerns about injury from motor vehicle collision, but also concern about motorist aggression as well. When you're talking about the concerns about confidence, we found that a lot more women in the study, they reported this lack of confidence with their physical ability, but also lack of confidence in how they went about purchasing a bike, maintaining a bike, and then when it went through to the actual bike riding as well. So we conducted 40 in-depth interviews as a part of this study on top of surveys to kind of understand the size of the problem. So we were able to find some really interesting explanations behind some of these things and understand some of the stories that these women had about, how they started to ride, or if they tried to ride and then didn't anymore because they had a particular experience, and it was pretty fascinating.
Well, it sounds like there's quite a few stumbling blocks on the way to even hitting the road, to be intimidated by the lack of infrastructure or other road users. Certainly, Joel's heard me talk a lot about the Chicks Who Ride Bikes project and what we're doing there, trying to give this confidence. In terms of infrastructure, that's a pretty long-term political game, Lauren. So I'm wondering, what are the quick fixes? Now that we know this, how can we break down some of those barriers when some of the bigger pieces are to a degree out of our hands?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, absolutely. So I would say that infrastructure is still obviously the number one thing to get more people, and particularly women, riding bikes. But as you've said, it's incredibly difficult to implement. It's a long-term thing. It really takes a lot of effort and time, and it is so complex to implement in terms of political concerns and short political cycles. So the other ways that we can go around this are other infrastructure solutions, so things like 30-kilometre-an-hour zones and also lower traffic neighbourhoods as well. And they still come with some of those complexities that we see around protected bike lanes and those other longer-term solutions, but are a little bit easier to implement. And then on top of that, you've also got the role of groups like Chicks Who Ride Bikes, which is just an incredible organisation, on top of other groups that we have. One in Victoria here is called Wheel Women. We have another one, I believe, in Queensland, which is called Spin Sisters. And these are really key to unpacking some of those barriers around the lack of confidence in purchase, maintenance, repair, through to riding as well. So really being able to empower women from all different ages and diversities and backgrounds to say, hey, this is something that you can do. You can ride a bike, and this can be an everyday way for you to get around and a way for you to be physically active.
On a Wheelhouse podcast, you're hearing from Dr Lauren Pearson. She's written a report about removing barriers, getting more women involved in the sport. She's from the Sustainable Mobility and Safety Research Group at Monash University. Lauren, I want to zero in quickly on what you're talking about with, you said the word complexity, you said the word maintenance, you said the word servicing, taking care of your bike. I'm interested in this as well. This is a part of it. As a newcomer to the sport, I'm terrified about getting a flat tyre because I'm like, if I'm 10 kilometres away from home and I lose a tyre, I don't know if I'm going to be able to change a tube. Kate talks about electric gears and things that just make my eyes spin into the back of my head. How is this something we can address? Because I can recognise this, as I say, as a newcomer to the sport, this side of it, like education, awareness and making people more confident in actually taking care of their bikes. How big of a barrier is this to remove, and how can we do that?
Yeah, so this surprisingly wasn't really a barrier that we thought about in the beginning. We didn't think it would be much of a thing, but when we interviewed people about the barriers, it was really something that came up a lot more. So we had a lot of women that were saying, I really want to ride my bike to this particular place, but I'm concerned I'll get a flat tire, I won't be able to know what to do, and then I can't get home and I'm going to have to walk home. So some real concerns about that. So what we saw was actually some substantial age differences in where this was reported and the kind of solutions that people were coming up with. So we found that younger women in the study were saying, oh, no, I've got a particular ride assist service or a program where if something happens to my bike, they'll come and pick me up in a taxi and my bike as well and take me home. So I've got no concern about that. Whereas the older women in the study had this real worry about it. So making sure that not only we have a good access to those kind of services, but also this opportunity for education as well. What we did see was that for people who did try to access these kind of maintenance classes or any kind of education pieces maybe provided by their local councils, was that they were really targeted towards men or people who were maybe a bit more proficient with bikes and knew a fair bit more, so that even when they tried to attend those or tried to engage with them, they really didn't feel welcomed or like it was something that was made for them. So making sure that we have some inclusive repair workshops or other education, for whether that's through programs like Chicks Who Ride Bikes and Wheel Women or provided by local councils as well. It's really one of the ways to get more people riding bikes as well.
Well, if you get your fingers Googling, Lauren, you'll find some pretty funny videos on YouTube of me attempting to give instructional videos. And I must say, when I first started doing it, I'd almost been in the sport for too long that it took me a while to be able to break down and really understand where our women were coming from. But we've had some pretty incredible experiences. A woman who rode an Ironman but didn't know how to take her water bottle out of her bike and did most of her training on the indoor trainer. So I understand a lot of this. We know that there is this big disparity between the genders, but I'm really curious as to whether you unpacked any of the big differences that cause this. Is it something about the way women are taught about sport and cycling? Is it more about safety and family? Anything in particular?
There's some really fantastic work out of some researchers in New Zealand, and they talk about how more women were concerned about being injured because often they were the primary carers within their family, whether that be for children or other people in their family. So if they're injured, who's going to be looking after that person? So they kind of have this extra layer of consideration that they had to take on board. in terms of actually starting to ride and getting into bike riding, we found that basically more men in the study were saying, oh, my brother rode, my dad rode, my mates rode when I was growing up, or they taught me how to do it. It's just something I've always known since I was a kid. It's really ingrained in them from the start, this kind of maintenance and repair and bike riding being a very normal thing. Whereas the women in the study, they talked about, I loved riding my bike as a kid. And we know that gender participation in bike riding is almost equal in children, if not more girls and women riding bikes. But as they get older, that really starts to drop off and decrease. So more of these concerns about confidence coming in, and also not having that knowledge about maintenance, not having these kind of people like, their mums, their sisters, other women around them encouraging them to ride and showing that that's an option for them as well.
It's fascinating. It really is. Dr. Lauren Pearson, really appreciate you getting on the phone and becoming a guest of the Wheelhouse podcast. By the way, like that, what an honour for you. We're so happy to hear what you have to say, and I guess the golden egg here is in Brisbane, particularly. We're leading up to a home Olympic Games. Infrastructure overhaul is part of the project, so there's so many opportunities here in the short and the long term as well. And you've given us some great insights. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.